YouTube channel. So anybody you know that missed it, if they want to see it, they can always check into our YouTube channel, West Pittston History, West Pittston Historical Society, excuse me. And the show will be there so they can catch it at almost any time. I'm Mary Portelli from the West Pittston Historical Society, and my able assistant over there, Judy. And as many of you know, I love to just do research about our community. And yeah, that would be fun. Thank you. I love to do research about our community, and I just thought this would be a fun topic and timely topic. And if you've seen some of our, I know many of you have been to previous programs that we've done. So if you like what we're doing, please, if you would like to support us, we have membership forms over here. We also have some sales things that we're selling. And this year we're introducing our Christmas ornament collection. And each year we hope to be doing a new Christmas ornament. So those are for sale as well, featuring a little town scene. I'm not a Halloween expert, but I do have a few little Halloween items in my collection of vintage things. And I just thought I would bring those along tonight, and also do a little bit of research on what Halloween was like, not just from my memory, but prior to my childhood, and things that we could find in the newspapers. So that's where this program comes from. The other stories of murder and mayhem we were going to discuss, but the Halloween part got a little bit long, and I know 8 o'clock will be here before we know it, so I just figured, well, we'll save those other stories for another program, at some point. So that's where we are. A lot of you may be familiar with the origins of Halloween as a Celtic ancient origination, and the Celts lived about 2,000 years ago in the area of the United Kingdom, Northern European United Kingdom, Ireland, Northern France, and at that time they had a celebration that they called Samhain, and Samhain was a celebration of the harvest. If you lived during that time, the harvest was incredibly important because it was a cold climate. That's all you had. Once the harvest was in, you were done until the next year. So the harvest was a huge important thing to sustain your life. And they would generally extinguish all their fires for a while they were getting the harvest in. And then once the harvest was done, this huge celebration would take place. They would have giant bonfires, and as you can see, something similar to what you see in that photo. And it was at the midpoint between the fall equinox and the winter solstice. So right around October 31st was the time. And the Celts believed that at this time, the barrier between the next life and this life became very thin and transparent, and that's when you could cross over between the two. And that's how they believed that the spirits would come back, or their dead relatives would come back and visit them, or they could summon their dead relatives. But they didn't want to be taken back with them, so a lot of times they would dress in costumes as animals and just other kinds of monsters so that they would not be dragged into the afterlife. In the 7th century, the Catholic Church decided maybe they could, it's a matter of some conjecture, put a more religious angle to this. So the Catholic Church starts with All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. And All Saints' Day was generally November 1st. So the celebration of All Saints' Day was also called All Hallows or All Hallow Mass. And that evolved into All Hallows Eve and eventually Halloween. So it was almost like they wanted to make Samhain more of a religious thing rather than a secular thing. And notice the spelling of Halloween with a little apostrophe. That was common. I've seen that in newspapers up until almost the 1970s, which surprised me because I don't particularly remember it being spelled that way when I was a kid, but it was commonly used in the newspapers up until the 70s. And trick-or-treating. When did trick-or-treating originate? Obviously it wasn't part of Samhain, but in England and Ireland, during the All Saints' Day celebrations, poor children would visit the homes of wealthier folks, and they would try to, they would tell them, I will pray for your family and for your dead ancestors if you can give me a piece of cake. And Halloween cake was kind of a tradition for many, many centuries, and kind of seems to have died down maybe in the 20th century, but Halloween cake was a big thing. And that's sort of how trick-or-treating started. Now, how did we get this coming to America? Well, like a lot of other things, immigration played a major role in this. And many of our early immigrants in this area came from Ireland, coal mines. They were amongst our first ethnic groups to immigrate to the United States. There was another factor that made the Irish want to come here. 1800s, mid-1800s, anybody know what happened in Ireland? Take a guess. Potato famine, right. And this went on for many, many years. So let's get out of here. So they came to the United States. They were able to find decent jobs around here in coal mines. And they brought some of these traditions with them. And along with that, Halloween came. And they celebrated much as they did in their homeland, putting farm animals on the rooftops, tipping over outhouses, uprooting vegetables, tipping over trash cans. It was a mischief thing. Generally, that's all it involved, was the mischief part, not the door-to-door stuff. And this was vandalism was not uncommon up until, even around the 19th century, it was not uncommon. Here's a train that was stopped by several outhouses placed in front of it. So if you think things are bad now. And these are just some cards. This child, if you look closely, he's painting a face on the teacher's head. And gate stealing was very common. And for a while, Halloween was referred to as gate night. And this mischief took place on Halloween. In recent decades, mischief was usually the night before Halloween, so you could still go out and do your trick-or-treating. But in this case, up until this point, it was still on Halloween. Now, around the turn of the century, late 1900s, early 20th century, you would see Halloween was for adults to have house parties. And everybody who was anybody was either attending a party or hosting a party. And they were these grand affairs with much decoration, lovely, lovely invitations. Here's another one. And it's just fun to look at these old decorations from the early part of the 20th century to see how they decorated. A part of this was games. And many of the games were aimed at younger adults, and it involved matchmaking. And a lot of the games you would play were to find a mate. So in this one, these are both Halloween postcards, and this one, may this be your luck on Halloween. It was the tradition to bake a ring into the Halloween cake. And the person who got the ring, of course, was the next one who would be getting married. I don't know if men were allowed to have the cake as well. Over here, if at midnight with a pumpkin light you steal to your room unseen, in the mirror appears the face of your lover true on Halloween. So you hold the pumpkin candle up to the mirror, and you're supposed to see the person who you will eventually marry. Now this one involves, she's probably not hoping that this works out for her. This particular game involves taking an apple peel and tossing it over your shoulder, and then it's supposed to fall in the shape of an initial on the floor. So the shape that it falls in is the initial of the person that will be your mate. If your hubby's name you wish to know, over your shoulder an apple peel throw, it will wiggle and coil, and you will see the first initial of who it will be for the witch's plot and the hero's scheme on the mystic night of Halloween. This trick positively cannot fail. There's a disclaimer on that. The more traditional apple bobbing, sometimes they would put the names of the people who were at the party on the apples, and then you would bob for apples and pick up the apple, and whoever's name was on it was the person you were supposed to be marrying.
Oh, wow.
There's another game that that involved a candle. I didn't have a picture of it here. A candle and an apple, like one on each end of a stick, and then it was suspended, and you spin it. And you're supposed to try to grab the apple, not the candle, in your mouth. So there was some danger involved. So around West Pittston, at the early part of the 20th century, 1902, the occasion for many gatherings in various sections of the town. I won't read the whole thing, but there were many social gatherings in all sections of town last evening. The young and the middle-aged were out for enjoyment. The boys were in evidence with their pranks, and there were many fences minus their gate in the morning.
Oh, wow.
While many vehicles, which in that day would have been wagons and carts and that kind of thing, not cars yet in West Pittston, many vehicles were carted about and left in out-of-the-way places. Timid people were more or less alarmed by the party of ghosts that were in the streets, especially by the Jenkins Cemetery on Wyoming Avenue, where they were darting from behind the tombstones and trees, and gave passers-by a nervous shock. So the adults were out having parties, and the boys were doing pranks. I don't know what the girls were doing. I never really found much about what the girls were supposed to be doing. And then this is just a nice story about lots of parties, and Miss Rhoda McCabe and her friends at her home on Packer Avenue. The house was decorated in a fitting manner with pretty autumn leaves and pumpkin moonshines. The fence in front of the home was lined with jack-o'-lanterns, which pointed the way to the oncoming party goers. So that's what was happening there. This article is 1918. It's a quiet Halloween for the West Side. Burgess Stanton, the Burgess was what we called our mayor back in those days. Burgess Stanton asked the Gazette to announce that the Halloween celebration in West Pittston this evening is going to be a quiet one. He's given instructions to the borough police to put a stop to all pranks and frolicking on the streets of the borough, and to prevent the young people from congregating in groups on the streets. Any thoughts on why this was needed? It's 1918.
Influenza.
Not prohibition.
Influenza.
Influenza. This is when the Spanish flu first hit this area. It was the fall of 1918. It really started in the spring in other parts of the country, but that's when they started closing the schools in West Pittston, was like October 1918. So it really put a damper on Halloween for those kids.
Wow.
And the Burgess said that he does not regard it as a fitting time when there is so much suffering and sorrow among people to indulge in frivolity, as such usually marks the Halloween celebration. So just interesting to see that. Halloween in the 1920s, the Jazz Age.
Yeah.
Decorations start picking up in that kind of fashion, and at that point we start to see two companies in particular, Dennison and Bristol companies, are manufacturing Halloween decorations. These two hanging pieces are originals over here. The Bristol company is still in business and makes a lot of reproductions. Some of these are reproductions, but this one would be an original as well. And these, they're just fun cardboardy things that you could buy in the 5 and 10. And in West Pittston, we had a fabulous store called Greenwald's. Who remembers Greenwald's? Anybody? Yes, a few of you remember Greenwald's. I feel like I spent half my childhood in Greenwald's. It was a little store that was across from where Antonio's is now, in those lots, those empty lots. And it was basically a tiny department store or a variety store. You could buy everything there. And they had a lot of this type of holiday things in there, and in addition to penny candy. So it was a great place for a kid to hang out. But the Bristol company is in Shippensburg, so a lot of local Pennsylvania people would buy their products, and you can still find a number of those pieces at yard sales and antique fairs and whatnot. So that's something to look for if you're interested in those type of collectibles. Here's a few more. These are reproductions, I think. They're in too good condition. That little fortune game is similar to this one, and if you look at this, you put a number in here. I guess you would use dice maybe, and it has girls' fortunes and boys' fortunes. So if you have really good eyes, you can read that because it's very tiny print. And then Dennison put out this little book every year. These are really collectible. If you've got one of these, they're very collectible, these boogie books. And they would give you ideas on how to decorate for your Halloween house parties. And of course, it would help them to sell products too, but they were just, and there were even recipes and costume ideas in them. And this would just be an example of a kind of a store where you would buy all of those products. And that child on the right, I think parents were, kids were given more responsibilities back in the 1920s than they are now. Because you probably wouldn't give your child that big knife.
Yeah.
Now, Halloween in the 1930s. This is kind of where trick-or-treating really started to thrive. And children would go out. Costumes were not store-bought for the most part. There were costumes that you could buy. This would be an example of one. It's really just kind of like a dress with a nice Halloween print on it. But most of the time, kids just raided their parents' closets and found something fun to wear, and they would go out. Even the masks were sort of homemade. Or if you were going to buy something, that's what you would buy, just a little mask of some sort. But kids couldn't afford parents couldn't afford to get their kids these elaborate costumes. The Thomas Ford Mansion. This was West Pittston's big haunted house. It looks fantastic and wonderful in this photo. This house was one of our grand mansions. It was on Susquehanna Avenue, the corner of Susquehanna and Montgomery. There are now 4 homes that occupy the lot where the Ford mansion was at one time. Mr. Ford was a real estate man in Pittston, and his home was in West Pittston. And he and his wife passed away. His daughter lived in New York and rarely visited West Pittston. So the house sat empty for decades. And over time, because it was empty, there were never lights on, there was never anybody around, it became known to people around town as the haunted house. And for those of you that remember Bill Hasty, Mr. Hasty, who died at 102 a few years ago, Mr. Hasty told me that he remembered they would run past the house, and you would cross the street. You wouldn't even walk on the same side of the street. The home was grand and glorious, and it was even in a local movie that was produced in, I think, 1918, 1919. But it fell into disrepair, and then when the Depression came, the family didn't want to pay the taxes on it anymore, so they tore it down, which is really sad. But a few years back, there was an article in the Dispatch where they talk about, also back in the 30s, another haunted house was widely known by Pittston people as the old Ford mansion that stood on the corner of Montgomery and Susquehanna. The house had been abandoned for many years, and there were reports of eerie lights and strange sounds about the old mansion. No one dared enter the house. And, it just talks about them walking on the other side of the street. But it's very sad that we lost that home, but it's a fun story. Ground zero for Halloween in West Pittston. The Hughes Mansion on Delaware Avenue, built by Richard Hughes, that's him. He was built in 1898, and the Hughes family owned Forest Castle Brewery. And for a time they were in business with Joe Glennon, who lived in a big grand house on an empty lot on Susquehanna that's now for sale by the bridge. But the Hughes family, for as long as I know, at least from the 1930s, I've been able to track it back that far, that they were doing Halloween at the house and giving out candy. But it wasn't necessarily Mr. Hughes that answered the door. It was the butler.
Yep.
The butler would answer the door, and for a while, folks have told me he would answer the door with a silver platter that had quarters on it, and he would tell you to take only one. And then in later time, he would come out with bags and give out little bags of goodies. I remember we were invited into the foyer, and they had all the dining room chairs sort of in a semicircle, and each chair had a barrel on it or a basket on it full of something, apples, candy, all kinds of different things, popcorn balls, and you could take something from each basket. So it was quite a haul when you went there. But I tried really hard to figure out where the origins of this came from. Like, what was so, like, why did the Hughes, was it just that they had enough money to do this? And I did find this little article that the Forest Castle Hotel was part of the brewery property, and in 1907 there was a big Halloween party up there that the Hughes family put on, and much merriment resulted, and there were many surprises when visitors unmasked at 11 o'clock, singing and dancing on Halloween. Games were played. So I don't know, perhaps that was the beginning of it. I can't really say for sure, but it's interesting to put that together with the Hughes mansion. But that's a nice old photo of the mansion that the Hughes family donated to the Historical Society. And look at those costumes. Those are pretty typical of the time. Now, typically when you think of mummers parades, we think of Philadelphia. But we actually had in Pittston and West Pittston for a number of years mummers parades, or what they referred to as mummers parades. Later on they became known as just the Halloween parade. They were always held on Halloween. So it was a way to keep kids from being mischievous and channeling them into something positive. And it was popularized. It was in Pittston, was where I think it was first proposed in 1914, but it didn't actually happen until 1917. And it was sponsored by the Pittston Planning Commission, which eventually became the Chamber of Commerce. And they would march through Pittston all the way over to West Pittston, and they would feature community groups, probably scouts. The high school bands would perform, and there were other local marching bands as well, not just high school bands. And also the businesses would often put together a float. And this went on for quite a few years. I remember my mom telling me about her dad's business had a float. And I guess it was a haunted house, and she and her cousin would dress up as ghosts every year and pop out of the windows of the house on the float. So this was what kind of made me start looking for this, and sure enough, here it is. The sponsors changed over the years. Eventually, the Pittston Athletic Club became the sponsor, and they gave out, the financial prizes were pretty impressive, especially for the Depression, and trophies were given to the winning entries. And they kind of refer to it as mummers because a lot of costumed people would participate. Try as I could, this is the only picture of a float I could locate. And sadly, this one didn't make the parade because the horse refused to cooperate. But that gives you an idea of what one of the floats might have looked like. The parade started, as I said, in 1917, went through 1939, but then they ended due to the high costs and the need of a sponsor. So in 1949, also the war was in there, and that made it difficult. 1949, the Lions Club thought it would be fun to revive this. So the Pittston Lions Club held this event again in 1949, but as far as I can tell, that was the last year for it because I could not find any more news about the parade. So I think it just sort of died a sad little death. In 1945, right after Roy Stauffer built his new showroom on Wyoming Avenue, and that's a picture of it as it was constructed. For those of you who are a little younger or newer in town, that would be the Garrity's Plaza down there. And this is the Wyoming Avenue side right here. And that was his showroom. In 1945, for whatever reason, they wanted to keep the kids off the street on Halloween night. So they thought, let's have a big party for them. So Mr. Stauffer offered up his showroom, and they had a huge party with about 1,000 kids. And he pretty much sponsored the whole thing, and prizes for costumes, wholesome fun for the young folks. So that was the idea behind that. Now, when you get to the 1950s, these store-bought costumes are getting to be a little more common. Who could ever forget the plastic masks? It was hard to breathe and they smelled terrible. It was also hard to see. But costumes became more affordable. Generally, they would be for TV stars or movie stars, so you could dress up like your favorite star, much like kids do today. Things that were different from what we have now for Halloween. Number one, you waited until it was dark. You didn't go out in the daylight. You wouldn't dream of going out in the daylight. We went inside people's homes. Okay, you would ring the doorbell and they would invite you in. It was a safer time. Not only that, you had to perform. You had to perform. That's what get your act together. You had to perform. You had to sing a song, read a poem, If it were my brother, he went to his math teacher's house with his friends and they recited the times tables. So, you could be clever, but you had to do something. You couldn't just go in and hold out your bag. You had to perform. I have asked people from a lot of different parts of the East. No one else remembers doing that. So I kind of think this might have been unique to this area. I don't know.
Oh, I did that.
Did you? Yeah. And I think it was kind of either, maybe not just northeastern Pennsylvania, but maybe, at least it didn't spread too far away from there. So that's what we did. So every year you had to think about, what am I going to say? Also, the streets were not teeming with kids. It was you went out with your little group, you didn't go with your parents. Despite the fact that we had a lot more kids in West Pittston in those days than we do now, it was, it still had an air of spookiness about it. It wasn't, I just remember feeling that little edge. And we stayed pretty much in our own communities unless we were going to visit relatives. We didn't really visit other towns just for trick-or-treating because you only wanted, for the most part, we went where we knew people. But that was sort of the 50s. Also in the 50s, one of the things that the high school did to give kids something to do every Saturday night, they held something called Youth Center.
Yep.
And Youth Center, okay, some of you are alumni of Youth Center. Youth Center was a really fun thing for the students at the school. They always had something to do every Saturday night, and it wasn't a date thing, you just went. And there were always activities, there was food, sometimes you had, when it was a holiday, something special would happen, there would be a party of some sort. So this is from 1954, and it talks about the Halloween party in 1954, and they had the Grand March to pick the winners of the costumes, and the most original was an Indian with a clever headdress. The funniest was a dancing grandmother. Chinese twins. See, these are terms you can't even use anymore. And then this last one is legendary. Cleopatra was carried on her shoulders, the shoulders of her 4 footmen, and it talks about all the people, and many of these people still live in town. And some people here were actually at this youth center. So it's and then cider and donuts were served following the Grand March. So it was just a fun, how we entertained our kids back in those days. Really?
Sterling is my father. I had no idea.
Ask him about
Your
it.
grandfather.
Ask him about it, yep.
I end up. How are you?
And I have a few photos here that people sent us of just Halloween from West Pittston. This was Fremont Street. I have no idea who any of these kids are, but it was the 1950s, and you can kind of get an idea about the costumes. They were pretty scary looking. They weren't the cutesy things that we sort of have now. And this is adorable, isn't it? Yeah. This is about 1955. I printed all of those out, and they're up on the table here if anybody wants to come up and look at them. And then this one on the right is Ken Ditato from Susquehanna Avenue. And Tony is the Zorro character there. Tony Ditato is the one who sent me this photo. And then he couldn't remember who the other 2 characters were, obviously friends of his. But it's the backyard of 300 Susquehanna.
Oh. Is Kenny the little one?
Kenny is the little one, yeah. And I put this photo in here of this little lantern, because that's part of my collection. My grandmother gave me that when I was about 3 years old, and
Wow.
I walked around town on many Halloweens holding it, and it's still not broken. so it's still remains in my collection. Part of Halloween in this area involved window painting. The merchants in Pittston allowed students from, in the beginning it was Pittston High School and West Pittston High School, and eventually they, Wyoming area and Pittston area, to come and paint their windows for Halloween, and there were prizes. It was sponsored by the Pittston Kiwanis Club originally, and then later by the Pittston Businessmen's Association. The young man on the left who won a prize is a very young Ed Ackerman, who many of you know writes for the Pittston Progress. I'm not sure who this young lady is on the right, but it just gives you an idea. And for a while, generally the prizes were a savings bond or a cash award, but for a while, the prize was really elevated. Senator Marty Murray, who was a local fellow, a state senator, was able to secure a 4-year college scholarship to any school in the state, including the University of Pennsylvania.
Wow.
So you could get an Ivy League scholarship for 4 years if you won the window painting contest. And the first year that they did this, the window that won was painted by 2 young ladies. So they had to somehow figure out which one of them was going to get the scholarship.
Oh my goodness.
And the girl who actually won went on to become an art teacher, from what I read, so I guess it was a good choice. And I don't know how that was resolved. I was never able to find an answer to that, but I just thought the story was kind of amusing. Another part of Halloween in West Pittston early on involved Trick or Treat for UNICEF. UNICEF was the United States International, what is it, Judy? You work for?
Children, UNICEF is UN Children's Organization.
Yeah, so it was basically the UN Children's Organization. So to raise money for that group, it was a national thing. They would send kids out trick-or-treating. So in West Pittston, this was pretty much sponsored by the Junior Women's Club that we used to have at one time. And they would send their young kids out. It was the night before Halloween, and you would go out and you would trick-or-treat, but you wouldn't get candy, you would get cash. And you bring your little cash container back, and it would be donated to the UNICEF fund. And then they had a party for the kids at the basement of the American Legion building on Linden Street. And I'm in this photo right here. And Judy, I'm guessing you're in here too someplace. Was your mom in the Junior Women's Club? She probably was.
Yeah, but I don't remember doing that.
You don't remember doing that?
I'm a little older than you.
Yeah, I know. Maybe they weren't doing it at that point. Anyway, and probably Bill Rowe was in there too. So that was one little thing we did in West Pittston. And I pulled some of these ads, local ads, because I thought they were interesting. I remember doing this American theater thing. They would have a horror show, or what they refer to as a horror show, at the American Theater in Pittston. And if you stayed through the whole thing, because it was supposed to be so horrible that you couldn't stand it and you'd go screaming from the theater. But if you stayed for the whole thing, see, we double dare the girls. If you stayed for the whole thing, you got a prize of some sort. Usually it was like a ticket to another movie at some point. And they had actors that would come out on stage in costume, and then they would play some horror movie of some sort, those 50s horror movies. So this was a fun thing. And Kresge's in Pittston, this was their Halloween ad. I'm not sure what year this was. It was either late 50s or early 60s. And early on, about 1920, this jeweler in Pittston was suggesting jewelry for Halloween. A Halloween present, jewelry for Halloween. Fetches, and I didn't know this existed, but some people told me this. There was a Fetches Bakery on Luzerne Avenue, kind of in the 46 would have been in that block across from Antonio's, and Grablick's Halloween, and then finally Top Spot, which was the burger joint in town that was where Antonio's is now. So free hamburgers to all children. You must be accompanied by an adult. So that would have been the 60s when that was around. In 1981, West Pittston was starting their celebration of their 125th anniversary year. And the opening event was going to be a Halloween ball. The anniversary year was actually 1982, so they just thought this would be a fun opening event. Interestingly enough, the chair people for this event were Mr. and Mrs. Jack Smurl. And some of you might remember that name. Their story is one for a whole other show, which we'll talk about. But for those of you that are new to town, they had a home that was known as, everybody knows that, okay. All right, gotcha. We also had a Halloween parade at one time for about maybe 12 years from the, I think, 89 to sometime in the, 81 to sometime in the early 2000s. And it was up at the Borough Building, that area, and then kids could go back there. I didn't even remember that. So that was past my Halloween days, so I don't recall that one. Also in the 1980s, Halloween got kind of ugly for a while. Many of you will remember taking your kids' candy to be x-rayed for pins and razor blades and other things. The Nesbitt Hospital was happy to cooperate with that. And in addition to this, arsons were a big thing in that period of time. And particularly, this was like a city thing, particularly in Detroit and Camden, New Jersey, and it was known as Hell Night, and horrible, horrible arsons, mostly empty buildings, but they'd start one on one side of the town, and the fire departments would get there, and then they'd go to the other side of town. It was an ugly time, and fortunately, we've gotten rid of that. Now we get to our present day Halloweens. We've really stepped up our game, especially here in West Pittston. I would still love to see a butler come out. And now we have Halloween Town. And a lot of folks going way, way out with their decorations. We have technology on our side now, so we can do so much more than we used to. I was just watching something this afternoon, kind of prepping for this, and the story was that in 1933 there was a movement, a national movement, to do away with Halloween because it had gotten so, the vandalism had gotten so bad. And trick-or-treating wasn't such a big part of it yet. It was still just the vandalism. And they really tried to start having community events, parties for kids, that kind of thing. And the party would be, you'd go to a party, you'd put your name in to win a prize, but you had to stay to win it. Because if you left and went home, you couldn't win the prize. So that's how they kept kids off the streets, that sort of plan. But it's evolved into a little bit more pleasant thing now. It's not, the vandalism part seems to have pretty much all but disappeared. Who remembers TPing houses and trees and some of the other soaping windows? All that, it was harmless, but it was still stuff that was done. Does anybody have comments or, where's Kendra? Kendra? I just want some lights. Let me see if she can put some lights on. Just some lights. I wasn't sure where they were. Yeah, you can get the lights, but we're pretty much done with the slideshow part. I would be happy to entertain any questions that I may be able to answer, or even if you have stories, I would love to hear stories. Anything anybody wants to contribute. If you come across any photos that you think would be fun, like, you know, similar to the old photos of Halloween kids, we're primarily looking for pre-1970 West Pittston. If you find anything that you think is fun, feel free to, you can email it to us. I'll put our email address in the slideshow, the YouTube thing. It's just westpittstonhistory@gmail.com. But you can email it to us or just send me a message, and I'll be happy to get in touch with you, and we'll figure out how to get a copy of it. But we have a lot of fun things up here, some old magazines and, you know, some reproduction stuff, but some current stuff. If you want to come up and look at anything, there's some books. Feel free to do that. We have cider, which should be warm by now, I would think. And there's candy. Help yourself to some Halloween candy. And
you don't have to sing.
huh? You don't have to sing. No, it's just we're going with 2024 regulations.
I ask almost all the Halloweeners that come to our door, do you have a joke? Do you have food? And I do get some, but
Once in a while, yeah.
The majority no, but I do, and, you know, and sometimes he'll go to his buddy, you know.
I'm glad you said that. You know, that because that reminds me of something I forgot to mention. In the 50s and 60s, at least in West Pittston, we didn't call it trick-or-treating. We called it Halloweening.
Yes.
It wasn't trick-or-treating. Okay, so it went past that. I don't know when it turned into trick-or-treating in this area anyway, but yeah, it was Halloweening. It warms my heart to see so many of you come out for our program. I really appreciate that. And we hope to, not sure yet what we're doing for next year, but we definitely will put it out there, and hopefully we'll see more people come back and learn more about our fantastic little town that has so many hidden secrets that I can talk forever. And we'll do murder and mayhem. You know, we actually were talking maybe next Halloween about doing a West Pittston Cemetery tour, like a nighttime tour, and talking about some of our founding fathers in town that are buried in that cemetery, because anybody who was anybody, including Mr. Ford, who owned that fantastic mansion, is buried in that cemetery. So yeah, maybe we'll do that next year. That would be fun. Okay. Yes.
I'm a West Pittstonian, all the members, you're talking about trick-or-treating, and you were right, like there was an excitement in the air. And I remember walking, because I live relatively close here, kicking the fall leaves.
Yes.
And there was that excitement, and you're right, you're in little groups, but you saw kids walking around. But the vandalism we had was smashing pumpkins.
Oh, yeah.
Your jack-o'-lantern didn't last long if you put it out. And of course, soaping windows. But how did it get to this Halloween town? Like, is it going to be designated that? I'm reading a lot about this in the newspaper.
Tom, you could
what's
probably
going
answer
on
that.
with
Tom is part of that group.
Yeah, what is?
It's just a branding thing because Halloween is so big in town. So it's kind of a branding effort. What we're trying to do is take the crowds that are on Delaware Ave and start spreading them out throughout the town with different kind of events. We're doing a scavenger hunt this year, for example. Next year we're going to be probably doing something for the kids earlier in the evening down at where the pool used to be. And we did a Halloween town map this year, a Google map, so people know that they can go to other places. If they go somewhere it's too crowded, they can go other places in town.
So it's not anything official. It's
I
just
see.
like a fun
It's
way
like
to.
a branding.
It's a way to
overall
organize it, right?
Yeah, we're gonna sell T-shirts with the logo on it and donate it back to buy candy for people.
Yeah, just have a nice
Stuff like
logo
that.
is the key, yeah,
Yeah.
designate, okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
we're a nonprofit.
I can see a kiosk on the corner with all kinds of
We're gonna do that. Yeah, we're gonna do that this
T-shirts
year.
and
We're gonna do
hats
that.
and-
We're gonna do that this year, but we're probably just do it online.
But yeah, I have to tell you, I intentionally don't rake the leaves on my sidewalk for Halloween, because I want the kids to have that experience of swishing through the leaves. Because that's something I remember too. So that's fun that you
Also,
mentioned.
you could burn the leaves.
Oh, yes, the
Hot
smell.
water, and you
The
could
smell, you could
that
smell the
smell of
leaves.
There was a smell of autumn that just added to the whole thing.
The thing that, if you ever watch the movie Meet Me in St. Louis,
Yes.
the Halloween scene from that movie just makes me think so much of West Pittston, except for the big giant fire. We didn't do that. But the scariness of it, and just the way the houses looked and the feeling, it really, really makes me think of how Halloween was in West Pittston at that time. Just a little more spooky than we have right now. It's hard to be spooky when you're out at 4:00 in the afternoon. Any other comments or questions? I truly appreciate everybody attending. I really do. It's a lot of work goes into these programs, and it's so much fun to have people coming out and really appreciating them. So thank you. Help yourself to some candy and some cider, because I don't want to take either of them home. So please come up and help yourself and take a peek at Judy's decorations here. Judy brought half of her Halloween stock from her store over here. Thanks.